This is the Tom Bigby Tales podcast. I'm Shannon Evans, and I write about a small town in Northeast Mississippi called Columbus. Today's episode, Working It, is about the recent year-end board meeting of the Columbus Lowndes County Convention and Visitors Bureau, also referred to as the CVB. Today's board meeting of the CVB defies explanation. If this was a novel, the publisher would believe the day's twists and turns. It went from warp speed to ludicrous speed in 3.25 gigawatts. Okay, I'm mixing my metaphors. I'm not even sure where to begin with the day's drama. Folks started arriving for the 8:30 meeting at 7:45. I arrived at the CVB office at about 8:15 and sat in the parking lot reviewing my notes. I was still reeling from the revelations of the night before. You see, apparently, the CVB director, Nancy Carpenter, has been going around town approaching nonprofits and requesting that they write her a letter of endorsement, which is not unusual. But where it does happen that is unusual is that of one of the many local nonprofit directors she had approached, they said, well, we'd love if you actually did provide us any economic support to our nonprofit, we would then consider writing a letter for you. But hey, we haven't ever gotten anything. So yeah, we won't be writing that letter. But I digress. This morning, I entered the 1,000-square-foot foyer where guests sit to observe the meeting on two large screen TVs while straining to listen to the actual event that's happening in a boardroom with open doors. The place has a state-of-the-art expensive audio-visual setup that they purchased for over $100,000, but either no one knows how to work the audio, it doesn't work, or the director does not want it working during public meetings. So in the packed room we sat, straining to hear. But as we waited for it to start, and it was standing room only, it resulted in all of us standing around and greeting each other and intermixing with the board members as they went around the room. Before the meeting started, the director began working the room and clearly ignoring myself and the two journalists who were present. She made sure she glad-handed and smiled at every politician that was present, including Leroy Brooks and Kareem Kabir, two members of the Board of Supervisors for Lowndes County. The meeting was open by the board president, where she acknowledged the social media discussions and questions I had created on the CVB director's behaviors and that a FOIA request had been made. The board's attorney then read their letter to me that essentially distanced themselves from the director and that stated the CVB board did not have a skybox and that Carpenter was not the director when the Trustmark historic sign marker money went missing. His answer, or his response in that letter, was based solely on Carpenter stating she wasn't the director at the time of that historic sign marker money debacle. In fact, per a February 26, 2011 article by Jan Swope and a 26 March 2011 article in the Dispatch, it is clearly reported that Carpenter was and had been the project manager of the CVB and was responsible for the 100th anniversary of William's birth, the inciting reason for that historic sign. And while the funds were being raised and in her safekeeping, she was as well the interim director of the CVB. The board states they want transparency and accuracy, yet did not check the basic facts that could be found in the 21 December 2010 Dispatch article by Ryan Poe that announced her appointment as the interim director of the CVB. The president and her board need to continue to look into the financial matters overseen by this director. Director Carpenter continues to misrepresent events and financials to her board, as evidenced by the discussions we'll examine later. And she also misrepresents the public funds that her position makes her responsible for. In the meeting, the floor was given to the director for her year-end report, where she is supposed to talk about all the metrics she and her board have accomplished. Metrics like numbers of tourists, number of conventions and conferences hosted, etc. Instead, she used it as an opportunity for her to remind us she only goes to Jackson to hobnob with minor politicians and sits on other boards. Her trips to Mississippi State, and of course, she had to name drop that she was a majorette there before most of us were even born. Her husband played football at Ole Miss, and to insinuate she had to go to Washington to ask for a flyby by the firework events that Columbus Air Force Base hosted on the 4th of July. When in reality, she or the base called our congressperson and filled out a request form. You see, the misrepresentations continue. The droning list only appeared to include one real metric related to tourism. 100 gift bags were given to unnamed dignitaries, and only 9,000 welcome bags were passed out to groups of newcomers to our town. A substantially low and unimpressive number. I just hope they remember to remove the expired area coupons from the bags that have been a common source of negative feedback on the welcome swag that we provide from our town. No real data was shared on visitors, just a blanket statement of them being from far and wide. Does she even do anything with the visitors log at the Welcome Center? There was absolutely no mention of the convention center except for a single event she avoided even promoting, the Henry Armstrong event. No mention of any future conventions, events, or conferences the city would be hosting in 2024, because there aren't any. What was missing from her speech was incredibly telling. It was the Nancy Carpenter self-promotion list, and it hammered home to the entire audience she was not interested in promoting Columbus and generating tourism dollars by bringing visitors to our town and giving them a reason to be here. It read like a 1940s teenage girl's dear diary of people she met and social events, not like a professional year-end review of the Bureau's metrics, actual accomplishments, or plans for the future. Carpenter did, however, ramble on about being on the Civil Rights Commission and being proud of the Juneteenth and neighborhood celebration she celebrated for her good friends, local politicians Leroy Brooks and Kareem Kabir, whom she recognized. She was blatantly virtue signaling, and it fell flat and rang hollow. As we all know, she only provided grant dollars of $15,000 and no real advertising support on the website other than a calendar-type link. Nothing even on the Visitor Bureau Facebook page. She did sit on the front porch of the Tennessee Williams house to watch the parade, though. Where Brooks got the funding for the band, the stage crew, and the rest of his event is a mystery, and Carpenter only seemed interested in saying, look, we support diversity events, and I have diversity support. Why Brooks was there is beyond me, as he has spent the bulk of Carpenter's years as director calling her a racist. Brooks has even threatened the CVB with lawsuits over grant disagreements with Carpenter. Brooks has been a thorn in Nancy's side for years. For their adversarial relationship to suddenly end and Brooks to suddenly throw his support behind her, it has to make you wonder why. Is $15K for his pet project enough to turn the tide when he knows she has refused to make final grant payments to his organization? Or does she have some financial funding promise she has made to him? I guess whatever it is in it for Kabir and Brooks, why were they there? Carpenter then went on to discuss working with the Pilgrimage Preservation Foundation while completely ignoring any mention of the Historic Home Tours group. That alone was telling that she plays favorites among groups and does not support equally the efforts of community members to bring visitors and tourism dollars to our town. There was zero financial impact statements in her year-end review. Again, another telling omission. The meeting then moved to the budget, where Carpenter hemmed and hawed and obfuscated when asked specific questions about expenditures. A board member even asked very pointed questions about grant disbursements not used or partially paid out and got no real satisfying answers. When queried about Mississippi University for Women's Athletic Support, Carpenter launched into how she attended and supported the choral competition, again, avoiding the topic in question asked. The director would put off every question to someone else to be answered later. She did say she would donate grants to a formerly incarcerated residence program in town if they thought that was a good idea. No one was sure what that had to do with tourism and felt like it was more virtue signaling by Carpenter. A board member raised the question of supporting a wayfinding sign project spearheaded by the city and county and the Main Street Association in town. Carpenter has an adversarial relationship with the Main Street organization, and also it should already be on next year's budget, and it was telling that it wasn't. Carpenter was not happy the question had been raised, but seeing she was outnumbered, she agreed, but was not willing to talk specifics. Additionally, before any bookkeeping and accounting question was answered by the accountant from TE Lot during this discussion and other discussions around the budget, the accountant would look at the director as if for approval to speak. Hello, the board is who asked the question, and the board is the one who decides on the budget. Another interesting discussion was then held about professional membership fees that number in the tens of thousands on their budget sheet. One membership, the Mississippi Heritage Hills Area Alliance, listen to my episode, The Self-Licking Ice Cream Cone, to understand the significance of this group to the director and her cronies. The board fought to get her to finally admit that the $10K spent was to buy her a seat on the Mississippi Heritage Hills Alliance board, the same board where the CVB gets almost yearly grants. Ethical concerns were raised. Tier 1 10K memberships are not required to obtain their grants. Other non-member groups apply for grants and obtain them. This led to a discussion on the Elks Club, and unfulfilled grants were brought up there. The discussion revolved around matching grants that will need to be returned because the museum has had no progress since before 2019. There are currently no plans before the board to do anything with the Elks Club, and so money needs to be returned. This seemed to really annoy the director. It was evident in her face. It was soon after that a motion was made to move to executive session, and the doors were closed to the public. 30 minutes into the executive session, the doors popped open. We were asked to clear the foyer due to a medical emergency. A board member had to be carried away by ambulance for a low blood sugar incident. The first responder was heard to say, "His meter reads 140, blood pressure normal. All good signs, and we wish him a speedy recovery." The meeting was adjourned until Thursday at 3 p.m. So, who had this change of events on their CVB bingo card? I certainly didn't. Stay tuned for the results of Thursday's executive session results. Until next time, stay curious and keep asking questions.